the big message really from the CEO was this is going to be quite a difficult year. It's a year where we're trying to turn things around, but actually it's going to be a really bad year for mobile. And he said on the call, and I think it might even have been in the report, that revenues in mobile will decline significantly this year.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. It's February. The weather's quite decent today. It feels a bit spring-like, even though it's February. And we've all got our fingers crossed that with everyone getting vaccinated, maybe we're just like a month away from being allowed to go at the pub. I should shut the window, shouldn't I? Can you hear that bloody bird kicking up? That's what I get.
Can you hear things over my microphone that aren't me?
No, but
that's good. If you can, tell me, and I'll.
You try and enjoy a bit of fresh air and some obnoxious bird, and by that I mean animal, decides to get involved. So cheers. We're back on the beers, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah, cheers.
And you got the stars in as well. We're a Staropramen podcast.
Has to be Staropramen, I think.
And Pierre is having a cheeky Beaujolais off the camera. Oh, that's
unusual
perfect.
for him. He's more of a pale ale man these days, I always thought, than a wine drinker. But
he's. Sorry, I've just got to make my phone go away. That's typical, isn't it? It was international, so it was almost certainly a spam call.
Yeah.
One thing before we get started, one funny story to talk about. I don't necessarily want to get into the story, but it's interesting that we've got so many reads from it. By far, our most read story this week is one written by Mary that's headlined "AT&T borrows $14.7 billion to buy Spectrum," and it's just gone really viral. Like it's already got as many as one of the most read stories that we've ever written. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on here? I mean, with all due respect to Mary, she's always writes stories very well. It's an interesting topic, but it's just not one that I necessarily expected to go through the roof. And then I started getting some comments in the forums and in the comment section. And initially it was just predictable stuff like, moaning about how much people are having to shell out on Spectrum and the government ripping them off and all that sort of thing. And then, what was it? Yeah, and then someone called Chris, without a C, without an H, I mean, CRIS, goes, such an idiotic headline. There's a cable/internet company named Spectrum, right? And I sort of had a little think, worked out what was going on about, and then I went, I didn't. But if that was the subject of the headline, it would have been capitalized, wouldn't it? And then I said, try to get out more, Chris. And then a few other people started going, basically indicating that they'd only clicked on the story because they thought we got some scoop on AT&T buying a company called Spectrum that I'd never heard of.
How bizarre.
Yes. I mean, my conscience is clear because we did write Spectrum with a small s.
And of course, that's weird because, look, most people in the industry, I think, if you know what Spectrum is and would recognise that a headline that's talking about, even if you didn't capitalise it, it's talking about frequencies.
Yes, well, so these are probably people not from the industry. And, given what just recently happened, there's probably quite a lot of amateur stock pickers out there who just suddenly thought, should I take some position on AT&T thanks to this bit of market goss? So I suspect that would have contributed.
Someone accused me of being involved in Nokia short selling.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because you wrote about them.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think my headline was Nokia faces a long road to mobile recovery. And he said, and someone wrote on Twitter, this headline could only have been written by somebody who's been involved in the whole Nokia short selling. And I wonder which hedge funds are compensating him. And I was like, hey?
What, he wants you to compensate him?
No, he said, I wonder which hedge funds are paying Ian Morris.
Oh, okay.
Reading.
Yeah, which ones?
I don't normally respond on Twitter to things like that, but I just sort of went, I wish, I think, or something.
You should have listed them. Yes, I know. Well, people like to throw unfounded accusations around. I mean, I did a much more direct reference to all that in my headline about the Nokia ones, which is actually appropriate, as that will lead us into our first
Yeah.
thing to discuss. Was Nokia unlikely to reward investors anytime soon?
Yeah.
So I was making a direct reference to all that. I was hoping actually that was a sort of headline that would go viral, but it didn't. And that's that's the moral of the story with online journalism. You just put stuff out there, and you never know which ones are gonna sort of hit big time.
Yeah.
But it's often not the ones you expect. So there you go. Okay, so let's say what we're going to chat about. We're going to talk about Nokia first, because the reason we both wrote about them is that they had their quarterly and annual, i.e. their Q4 earnings announcements. So we get to have a look at that. Then we're going to talk about our incredibly tech-savvy Parliament. One of its committees came out with a report going, yeah, we need to be a bit better at 5G and Ting. So I sort of took the piss out of it. But it looks like one of the reasons for their ignorance on the matter is who they're using as their sources. So we'll get into that. And then finally, we're going to talk a bit about Vodafone. You wrote about Vodafone. They had their quarterlies. I didn't cover it because, quite frankly, I find operator quarterlies really boring.
They can be boring.
Yeah,
it's usually
flat.
There's usually not any excitement in terms of sales movements. That's the thing. But
yeah,
sort of hope there's something else that's going on that's interesting, and I think there was on this one.
Yes, well, good, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it if it was down to me. So if it turns out to be shit, it's your fault.
Okay. And puts me under pressure, but at least it's the last item.
And I hate having to use words like EBITDA as well.
I should make sure I do not use EBITDA then.
And then I've got a little sort of personal, like only not really telecoms-y rant about tech oligarchs taking over the world. So if I decide we've got time, I'll inflict that on everyone. But that'll be a bonus segment if it happens. Okay, so just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. Right, so Nokia, I'm just going to hand the ball straight to you, Ian, because you did a much more thorough job and you actually bothered to listen to their earnings call.
No, I didn't.
Oh, didn't you? Oh, you made reference to it. Oh, no, you had a call
I get invited these days for some reason to join the phone call in the morning with the CEO.
That's it. Sorry, that's what I meant.
And it's usually people from Reuters and Bloomberg, and they
proper journalists.
Yeah.
And somehow you sneak in.
Somehow I've sneaked into it. So but it was a bit. I mean, it's a bit awkward, that phone call, because it's at 7:00 in the morning, our time, which is most of the people on the call are obviously in Finland. And I kind of climb out of bed at 6:00 with my hair all over the place, drinking a coffee. Sometimes I'm actually still in bed when I do it. And this time they decided to do it on Teams with all the cameras and everything. So I had to sort of quickly switch my Teams camera off when I got on. I asked people in my house to still asleep as I'm doing it.
Right.
So yeah, but
yeah. You get your missus chucking a pillow at you, telling you to shut up.
Yeah, it was better quality than on the phone actually on Teams, but it's a bit weird just sitting there with. That's what I don't like about it. Everybody staring at you, but it's good to get a bit of. I did manage to ask a couple of questions, which is always nice to be able to sort of put the CEO.
So why don't you give us the top line of Nokia's numbers, and then by all means do tell us.
Yeah, so the top line of their actual numbers is not great. I mean, they had a pretty tough last year. Obviously, the pandemic was a factor. They'd already referred to that, I think, during 2020.
Didn't do Ericsson any harm though, did it?
Well, this is the thing, I suppose. You're always going to look at. I mean, they're a broader company than Ericsson in terms of doing. They have a big broadband business.
Fixed line. Yeah,
big optical business, a big IP business. So there's a lot more moving parts, but they still generate most of their 50%, I think, more or less, from mobile access.
At least, I think. Yeah.
Where all the attention is because of 5G, and everybody's excited about that. And obviously, if that's not going well, then it makes a huge difference because it generates so much revenue. And in that area, which is where all the focus was, really, they didn't do. They don't look good next to Ericsson. Clearly, I think their revenues are down reported 6% and 4% on a constant currency basis.
Adjusted for adjustments.
Adjusted for all sorts of adjustments. But, a few bad things happened. I mean, you go back the year before when, and we've talked about this a few times, this goes back actually to before 2019, but came to light then, this costly decision they made to use more expensive components in the 5G products, which they've been trying to deal with ever since then. They've been trying to phase.
It's just an amazing example of a really clear-cut strategic misstep, isn't it?
I think it's a strategic misstep. I think happened partly because of the Alcatel-Lucent merger. I mean, the previous CFO, who's gone now, more or less said that to me on the phone when I had a chat with him, that they were kind of distracted by that merger, and I think they were looking for shortcuts, perhaps, and also maybe thought that these programmable components would give them some kind of advantage. But they obviously didn't anticipate the effect it was going to have on margins, and it's been bad.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I don't get. I know it's conventional wisdom that big M&A is a big distraction, and I don't doubt that it is. But I don't understand how a professional executive team can't go, right, I'm going to obsess about this M&A. You, mobile guy, you don't give a fuck about the M&A. You just concentrate on mobile shit. And so as an excuse for them making that bad decision, I mean, I don't know. I just
think it was a disruptive process because they were having to. I mean, the rationale for that merger was that it would give them a big fixed line IP optical business that's been very, very highly regarded in the industry. Now, Alcatel is sort of best in the world at that stuff, and is still highly regarded now. That's the real good bit about Nokia, actually.
Yeah.
These days, but they also had a big mobile business, and I think bringing those two together just caused a lot of disruption. To sort of phase out some products, decide which ones to keep. And they were making cuts while this was going on to research and development spending. Ever since that merger's been completed, that's been coming down. And
so do you think that might be, sorry to keep butting in, but it interests me, this FPGA thing, so field programmable gate array, which is a type of silicon which is field programmable, i.e. you can change its function in the field when it's already embedded, which sounds very tempting. But obviously it's more expensive. And so on one level, it could just be a sales failure that the sales and marketing people have failed to convince customers that it's worth investing more upfront for this flexibility. But it could be, as you were just saying, because they weren't, it could be a sort of sitting on the fence thing. We're not quite sure what our strategy is. So maybe we'll have a bit of kit that you can sort of tweak after the fact.
Do you know what? I don't know, and I'd really like to be able to. There's a guy who's actually in charge of mobile at the moment called Tommy Uito, who's the head of mobile at Nokia.
Tommy with an I, nice and finished.
Yeah, and last year when Mobile World Congress was supposed to happen and then didn't, I was supposed to meet him, and this was a hot topic then because it was not long after it happened. So, one of my plans was to basically try and dig into this a bit more. Why did that decision get taken? What were you hoping would come of it? And there's still questions that need to be answered. No one's really written about this in detail. And I think everybody's just now focused on what do they do about it. It's kind of accepted it was wrong. And, but it definitely is a story at some point that needs to be written.
Yes.
Going to the future, what they're obviously, have recognised that having those components isn't ideal. They're trying to phase them out. Now, the good news is they're making pretty good progress on that. They're actually ahead of targets for shifting to lower cost stuff, and you can see the margins are improving there already. If you look at the gross margins in the networks business, they're up a lot. But it's going to take a long time. I think it's not until the end of 2022 they think they're going to have completely finished that transition. So it's a long process, and in the meantime they've just had quite a few setbacks in mobile, and I guess it's partly related to this. It's affected competitiveness, I think, and they've lost some deals. They we both wrote about them not winning any of the big kind of 5G RAN contracts in China. They've now more or less exited that 5G RAN market in China. So they don't even, they don't even show their market share considering China anymore. They sort of, this is our market share outside that region.
No, they do. I was just looking at the slides that I put into my story. They've got total net sales by region, and Greater China was down 10%.
It's more than that, I think, year on year. It's for the whole year. I think it's down something like a quarter, the Greater China.
Oh, for the full year. Well, this is Q4. This is Q4.
So the whole year is down a lot.
Right.
But what they've done is they have a market share figure for their market share of 4G and 5G RAN. and they're publishing that every quarter because they obviously know that investors are tracking this and they need to perceive them they're not losing market share, and they are. And it doesn't count China anymore. So outside China, their market share at the end of last year was 27%. Now, what's going to happen this year is it's going to go down to between 25 and 27%, they reckon. And the reason for that is North America. So it's not only China that's been a problem. They've also lost a big deal in North America. They've never singled out the operator themselves, but it's fairly apparent that it's Verizon, and the company that's come in instead is Samsung, and has basically landed a very big 5G contract last year that Verizon was hoping to strike, and this is affecting the outlook for this year. So the big message really from the CEO was this is going to be quite a difficult year. It's a year where we're trying to turn things around, but actually it's going to be a really bad year for mobile. And he said on the call, and I think it might even have been in the report, that revenues in mobile will decline significantly this year.
Just full stop. The
headline
total
forecast.
market.
Yeah, I think the headline forecast isn't all that bad. So I think that I've got my story.
So what's Deloro say?
Figures. Well, in terms of the actual addressable market development, I can't remember that off the top of my head.
Okay. But I don't seem to remember Ericsson, who usually cite Deloro numbers. I don't remember them talking about a
I think it's growing this year. The RAN market this year is forecast to grow by Deloro.
So what's Nokia going on about then?
Well, I'm talking about Nokia's sales. Significant.
Oh, I see. I thought you were referring to the overall
I'm not talking
market.
about the addressable market. I'm talking about because of what's happened to them in China and because of what's happened to them in North America, that their forecast this year is for a significant decline in mobile sales in Nokia's business.
Yes.
I'm talking about the addressable market. And what that means is, so if you look at their top line projection for the overall business, and I've got my numbers here just so I can cite them.
I've got numbers here as well. I've got their slides.
20.6 billion to 21.8 billion, which compares with 21.9 billion in 2020. So it's not that bad at the upper end. But what it means is they're basically expected to do very well in areas that aren't mobile. So optical, IP, fixed access, core, all these other bits that Nokia does, and it does quite well, and which are actually quite weak last year. I think partly because of currency movements, but also there was some pressure in some of those business areas last year. But they're expecting to have a pretty good year outside mobile to sort of compensate for the fact that mobile declined significantly, in the CEO's own words, this year. So it's a bit of a grim kind of forecast.
Now, it is because mobile, as you say, I mean, looking at their total, this is just looking at Q4, their total revenues were 6.6 billion euros, of which over 5 billion was networks, and of which about 3.5 billion was mobile access.
It's massive, and
that's more than half.
Technologies and other things and software. It's, as I say, it's about 50% of overall sales for Nokia. So
all those other bits, all the fixed line stuff. I mean, the thing about the fixed line stuff, I mean, good for them. I'm pleased for them if it's growing and they're doing a decent job. We had a story this week about. This isn't the Vodafone thing we're going to talk about, but it's worth a mention. They trialed this 100 gig PON passive optical network, i.e. fiber. So they've got some new technology that's enabling ever more capacity over a given bit of fiber. So they're obviously doing well on that side.
Yeah.
But it's relatively small potatoes compared to the mobile side. That's all.
It is, and it's, if you add them all together, it's still a massive business. Obviously, you put the optical and the IP and the core stuff and the software things they do and the OSS and BSS products. It's still 50% of Nokia's sale. You're still talking about a $10 billion business, so billion euro business. So it's big, but it's unfortunately most of the money is in that kind of mobile infrastructure side of things, and that's why everybody's so focused on it. I mean, I will say that this. Lundmark's he's sort of going through the period at the moment that Börje Ekholm at Ericsson went through back in 2017.
When he just joined.
It was a really bad year for Ericsson, if you remember. They finished with losses, and I remember we were in podcast sessions like this, sort of saying, I'm not really sure about this guy, whether he really knows what he's doing. And I was skeptical he'd be able to turn it around, and he did. So I think he needs to be given time. Obviously, Pekka Lundmark, he's only just come in. He's been there 6 months, and I think he's done some sensible things already, to be honest with you. I mean, this whole business about, moving away from this end-to-end strategy that his predecessor had, where it's a difficult one to do in a way because it was actually the whole rationale.
Well, I was just going to say that when we're talking about the fixed line side of things, it's one thing for them to be doing all right as a standalone business, but all that rationale of, you don't need to go anywhere else. We can connect you right from the heart of the internet to the edge of your network. That hasn't really come through, has it?
No, it hasn't, and it raises questions about the takeover in a way. Why did you do it? Because that was how it was. That was how it was built. That we can end-to-end sales and sell everyone everything. And one of the first things he said, actually, Lundmark, when he came on the phone back in the third quarter, just after he'd sort of been, at the helm for a few weeks, was that's not how customers buy these days. Some of them, but now they can still. That doesn't completely mean that the deal's stupid. They can still have very successful standalone businesses, and do very well with them all. But what it means is a lot of the way that Nokia was structured just doesn't make sense. I think there were too many people
synergies
decision making. Yeah, he was saying himself that you try and sell a mobile product, and it's there were several members of the senior management team kind of having to be involved simply because they were trying to do this end-to-end thing and bringing in different parts.
No, and then they throw FPGAs in. Can you imagine what it's like to be a salesman? Right, sort of Vodafone turns up and goes, right, we need some fucking radios. Yeah, well, all right, but how about all this and this weird chip and all this sort of stuff, and everything's got to have a sparkler or an umbrella in it, and you're like, calm down.
Exactly.
Go to Ericsson. They're not overcomplicating things.
So I think he's done a sensible thing with that, and I also and his restructuring, which is underway at the moment, I think is also sensible. So one of the things he's done is to actually make it hasn't shown up in this year's results, but it will start to now, to make mobile a completely separate business. Now, what that does is it creates a lot of transparency. So what hasn't been clear last year is exactly how much they're spending, for instance, on research and development and mobile. They say that they're not cutting that and they're putting more money in, but you'll be able to.
You had that quote of spending whatever it takes, didn't you?
It was, exactly. So he's put his sort of flag in the ground, and he's also spun this off so people can actually see it's its own independent. He can hold them to account as well. That's the nice thing. He can look at this, and he can look at a separate set of numbers, and he can see what's going on rather than having it sort of lumped in with all the other network stuff, which I think makes it a lot harder. So I think that's a really sensible move for all sorts of reasons. The ending the end-to-end stuff and end-to-end or whatever. And also just making it more transparent what's going on, I think are really sensible moves. And he's pretty blunt about the challenges they face. He doesn't sort of dodge the difficult questions, and he's just come in. So let's give him time and see what happens. But it's definitely going to be a challenge for them, I think, to move it around. Well, I mean, so many moving parts. And
the takeaway I got from it is just don't get your hopes up for the next year. That's why I wrote a headline. As I mentioned earlier, referring specifically to investors, partly because I thought maybe I'll lure in a few of these fucking Reddit types, but it didn't seem to hit the jackpot this time. Unlike the previous sort of Nokia short selling one I wrote that did. But yes, if you're going to invest in Nokia, like my tenner that I got in Nokia, that's going. That's not going to turn into 20 quid anytime soon.
No, probably not. No. I mean, the other thing I'd say is on there are a few positive things going on in mobile. As I say, the phase out of these costly chips is a bit ahead of schedule, and maybe that will allow them to. Maybe that will give them a bit more flexibility, because that's obviously been something that's been weighing on margins, and those seem to be going up every quarter. So there's a bit of headroom there, perhaps. And the other thing is the whole sort of geopolitics is playing quite well into their hands at the moment in certain regions of the world. And he talked
in terms of no Huawei.
Exactly. So even though they've forget about China, they can move on past that now. They've got some issues in North America, maybe with Verizon, but hopefully that's.
Yeah. Do you think that was always inevitable? I mean, I'm sure Vestberg isn't quite as trivially and petty as all that, but Nokia must have thought, oh shit, former CEO of Ericsson taking over at Verizon. That's not going to be great for us, is it?
I don't think. Yeah, like you say, he's not trivial and petty, and he's not going to make a decision about a major supplier because he happened to work with rivals. But he's, I think they want to diversify perhaps a bit as well. In the same way, we hear diversification talked about a lot in Europe at the moment, and we're going to talk about that more in when it comes to the UK a little bit later. But obviously US operators are looking at their options as well. And one of the companies that's been sort of rising up the agenda a little bit, I think, is Samsung in the 5G network equipment market. And so they've really kind of target, from what I understand from talking to analysts, is they've really gone in hard in America as a region where they feel they can land some work and have.
Yeah, well, there've been so many buying signals, especially from the government.
Yeah. So they were always, if they couldn't pick up anything there, then where were they going to pick up something? So I'm guessing what they did is to go in hard with some really price competitive stuff, and Verizon just snapped it up. And the company that was going to lose out, if anyone was probably Nokia, because as you say,
wasn't going to be Ericsson.
Maybe you have some loyalties to Ericsson, and also Nokia's had these difficulties. So it wasn't really a good sort of scenario for them, I think. But if we look at Europe and what's going on there, as we were saying, that the swap outs that are going on with governments banning Chinese suppliers or operators just deciding they're not going to use them because of the risk that could happen, and also because of concerns, I think, about Huawei's business, is a good thing for Nokia. And they have, we've written about a few deals they've landed. They're not. The trouble with Europe is it's very fragmented, lots and lots of small companies. It's not going to move the needle massively unless you pick up a major contract with Deutsche Telekom, perhaps that spans the whole region. But
get in with this new gang of Open RAN people.
All that,
who Tim just joined today. They got the Italians on board.
I saw that. Yeah. They were obviously having a late afternoon snooze when the MOU was signed originally, I think.
Like, come on, Tim, put the prosecco down.
Was that your headline?
Yeah, come on, Tim. Just give the prosecco infused with limoncello a rest for a bit. Have an espresso and pay attention.
Yeah. Open RAN is obviously like something that's going on a lot in Europe at the moment, and how that works out for Nokia, I don't know. That sort of remains to be seen. Slightly different.
But I only brought it up because increasingly, as you say, it's very fragmented.
It's fragmented and it's not growing. That's the other problem, I think, for the is that, and Ericsson made this point as well, is they're growing market share, which they say they're doing at the expense of everybody, and Nokia says it is picking up market share at the expense of the Chinese vendors, obviously, but the actual market itself isn't getting any bigger. And one of the reasons is delays to spectrum auctions. Actually, they've just, a lot of governments have just not moved ahead with auctioning spectrum during the pandemic, and that's held things back. You've had a few operators, I think, kind of trimming their budgets and trying not to spend as much
and it makes you wonder whether the governments have paused it just because they're worried about not raking in enough cash.
Well, I think that is why they've paused it, isn't it, really? Yeah. I don't think there's a reason why you'd pause it. It's not like everybody needs to get together in the pub. And
it's like a cattle market or something.
And sort of breathe over each other. So
I know, actually, that does give me the opportunity to have one of my little Europe digs. Because, of course, we had all this fun. I wonder, we had all this fun a week ago about the vaccines, where it seems clear that the reason the European Commission lost its composure is because we got a very clear example of the UK, having just left Europe, being able to act in a more agile way as a result of not being held back by the drag of European bureaucracy. And pretty much everyone's come out and admitted that. Even the European Commission, even zealots like Guy Verhofstadt have just gone, we kind of fucked that one up. And it just makes me wonder whether culturally, and I doubt it, by the way, but culturally, whether that's going to make Europe think, hold on a sec, we're actually harming the whole bloc by being over bureaucratic. Let's see if we can strip out some levels of bureaucracy and speed shit up a bit, and whether or not that will apply to telecoms. Like I said, I don't expect it. I think it's in its DNA to add more layers of bureaucracy, not to strip them away. But you never know.
You never know. Maybe what's going on at the moment is the beginning of the end of the EU. Who knows?
I doubt it's that, but maybe it's it's the transformation. I don't even necessarily want the EU to go away. I just don't like the way it operates. It strikes me as a club designed.
Well, maybe if it does go away, I think it'd be a good thing for the UK now that we're out of it, for it to go away and maybe come together again, not in the same way, but just to actually be a trading bloc and not something that's
that ship sailed when they formed the euro. I'm afraid, mate. They're going to
This
have
is
to
a
keep
massive
doubling
tangent,
down.
isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But anyway, well, actually, that sort of brings up, seeing as we're talking about like the more political side of it, we might as well move on from there. I mean, I don't know if you've got anything else to add about Nokia. Were there any specific questions you asked old Pekka? Did you ask him if he's
I mean,
keeping his pecker up?
I didn't ask him that, no, because I get invited back onto future calls. But it is a good one. Now, what did I ask him? And I some of the questions had already been asked. I mean, I think I asked him about opportunities, geopolitical opportunities outside the mobile RAN, actually, because we've heard there's been a lot of focus on that and less focus actually on what's happening in some other bits of the network, which I've been trying to dig into a bit more recently. It's interesting seeing the fixed access market actually, and how much of that is still sort of controlled by Huawei and ZTE. And he commented that they are seeing some opportunities there as well in Europe in particular. And then I asked him about costs, because the restructuring itself and the suggestion that they're going to spend more on research and development, and they're also guiding for this operating margin of 7 to 10%, even though sales are falling. It all points to them cutting costs in other areas, doesn't it? Which doesn't sound good for jobs.
Money's got to come from somewhere, isn't it?
And they cut quite a lot of jobs actually in 2019. They're a company that, unlike Ericsson, only reveals job statistics in their annual report, not in their quarterlies. So you can't see what happened last year. But I think about 5,000 jobs went at Nokia in 2019. Yeah. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't quite a lot in 2020. So I'm curious to know what happens there. And he wouldn't be drawn on that. He said that we're going to provide more detail about all of that at the March Capital Markets Day.
Yeah, well, I mean, they seem to, in Q4, I was comparing, I think this is just Q4 I'm looking at. No, I'm looking at full year. Full year 2020, sales were down from 23.3 billion to 21.9 billion, but margin was up from 8.6 to 9.7. So that can only be as a result of efficiencies, i.e. sort of redundancies and that sort of thing, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, they had this. You saw some of that obviously in the headcount reduction in 2019 and 2020. We don't know, but I suspect it's down again.
Yeah,
had this 500 million euro cost saving plan. It was actually 700 million euro originally, but it got reduced because they were concerned about the impact on R&D, and they wanted to kind of ring that. And they've hit that now. They've hit this 500 million target, but I'm not sure it's enough. I mean, companies, they hit these targets and they come out with new ones, and the implication of restructuring, and certainly there's been some damage done on the management side. There's been quite a few people who are leaving Nokia at the moment on the senior management side. You would think that there's going to be a similar kind of trickle-down effect. You think that with sales forecast to drop and margins to remain reasonably healthy, 7 to 10%, and they want to spend more on R&D, it all sounds to me like that 500 million alone isn't going to do the job. They're going to have to cut more, and he's just not saying anything in detail about that yet.
No, and I think you've come to saying, you made the same comparison. Well, you sort of alluded to it a minute ago, and I wrote it in my piece. They're basically trying to do what Ericsson did in 2017, which, if you reduce it down to its essence, it's keep cutting until we're solidly profitable, and then build up from there.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the long and short of it, isn't it?
It is, and that's exactly what's happened at Ericsson. They cut a huge number of jobs, actually. It came out of the Capital Markets Day, how many? 25,000 jobs they cut under Echo. Now, their net reduction is not as much because they've started taking people on. They bought a couple of things like Catherine, this antennas business, and they're buying a company called Cradle Point at the moment, which is, I think it's finished, actually, that deal. I think it's gone through.
Yeah, but I think I saw that.
To the numbers a bit. But yeah, it's very much that sort of, boil it down to the basics, build back up. I think what makes it a bit easier these days, and it's not good for any of us, but I think automation and some of the new technologies that are coming along. I mean, Ericsson's alluded to this, that a lot of the jobs that have gone in their managed services area have been due to automation. They just have tools now that they can use instead of actually having people doing those tasks. They've basically acknowledged that, and that's cost a lot of jobs, as I understand it. So Nokia is going to see similar opportunities to take advantage of those and kind of get a more streamlined workforce, which bodes well for the margins, but not so well for employees.
Yes, quite, and not so much for investors. But then even Ericsson's, like I said before, I've got 10 or 20 quid in Ericsson. They're only my investment that was probably done 6 months or so ago is only up single figure percentages. So it's not like Ericsson's share price is growing like crazy. either.
No. Well, they tend to bob around a lot, don't they, the equipment makers? I mean, I noticed Ericsson's was up about 11% on the day that it came out with its own
Yeah,
earnings.
they have these. Yeah, I mean,
But
like with any
they
big
do
company.
drop. They get, there's a bit of, I mean, there's obviously weird stuff that's been going on with Nokia with all this short selling, but they tend to bob around between ranges quite a lot, and they never do anything too startling. And they might go up a lot on one day when
No.
it's an earnings announcement, but they'll drop the next week for some
I'll tell
reason.
you one thing, a little tangent. I'll tell you what's been doing well for me is Ganj stocks.
Right.
So there's all these companies, a lot of them based in Canada, that because the US may be on the verge of, a lot of states have legalized dope in the States.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
And I think there's rumors that they're on the verge of legalizing it federally. So yeah, it's one of those things where if you got the stocks, like there's this one company called Tilray that I bought a little bit of, and it's up 200% since I bought it. So it's tripled.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering when to exit Ganj. When to exit Ganj, mate?
Never.
Have we
Never
hit peak
exit
Ganj, or has it got further to go?
Maybe.
So yes, that's an interesting one. But you're not going to get that kind of volatility from. Ironically, it's the Ganj where you got the volatility. Even though, if anyone splits a bit of it, the last thing they're going to do is be volatile. But there we go. Okay, let's move it on at that point. I wrote a bit. I know you got some thoughts on it, but I might as well talk about what I wrote first. This was yesterday. Headline was UK Parliament reckons having just 2 telecoms vendors isn't great. And that was my slightly sort of sarky take on this. A report from the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee. And it's titled 5G Market Diversification and Wider Lessons for Critical and Emerging Technologies. Now, the top line for that for me was them going, yeah, since we got rid of all the Chinese vendors, there's only 2 left. And that's not great, is it? Hence my headline. And then they go into the usual exhaustive length on the subject, and they talk about strategic foresight, as if we should have somehow seen this coming. But I mean, it was a political move, and we did see it coming. Obviously, kicking Huawei and ZTE out of the country was only going to ever lead to 2 vendors. And then they start going into sort of alternatives and emerging technologies and all that sort of thing. And you can tell what they're really doing, and they do eventually address it directly. But what they're really doing is skirting around good old Open RAN.
Yeah.
And they're basically saying, come on, government, Open RAN's going to solve various problems, including sort of diversity of vendors and all that sort of thing. And then I'll lead up to what I sort of concluded before asking you what you think. Let me say, so in my penultimate paragraph, I said, so ultimately the recommendation seems to be that the way the government can achieve the desired strategic aims is by dangling the carrot of public money in front of UK operators, but making it conditional on them spending it in the approved way. So that seemed to be the recommendations they're going, is like, by all means chuck a bit of money at operators, but say that they've got to spend it on Open RAN or strategically favoured things.
Yeah.
And then I said sensible operators will presumably either reject the money outright, or if the condition will reject the money if the conditions are too onerous, or more likely grab the cash and then game the system, because that's normally what happens. The conditions attached are too easy to sort of circumvent. So they go, okay, here's 100 million. Make sure you spend it on the shit we say, and then they find some way of saying, yeah, we did, just in a roundabout way. So anyway, that was my sort of top line take on that report. What about you?
Yeah, I sort of have mixed feelings about it, really. I mean, I thought it was quite a detailed and thorough look at some of the issues. As you say, it's pretty obvious that, if you ban Huawei, one of the big vendors, then you're going to be left with a duopoly. We wrote articles about this before it happened, and now it has happened. And unfortunately, there's no alternative to those 2 players if you don't have the Chinese vendors as well at the moment. Everybody recognises that. And so it's kind of, what do we do about it? And as you say, there's a huge amount of focus on Open RAN, which has emerged as it seems to be touted as the solution to this problem, not just in the UK but in the wider world. If we can't use Huawei and we, the only other options are Ericsson, Nokia, then the only thing we can do about it is to support this emerging technology called Open RAN. And I thought it was quite frank actually in its assessment of Open RAN. The report, it raises a huge number of concerns about Open RAN, which until now, you listen to this is a parliamentary report. We have to remember this isn't the government. This is cross-party, so it's not sort of trying to toe the government line. It's just there to make recommendations and to give its views. And I've criticised the UK a lot, I think, for trying to sort of put all its eggs, if you like, in the Open RAN basket and assume that this technology is going to solve problems. And they're quite explicit about saying, hang on a minute, there's no guarantee of success. I think they use words with Open RAN.
Yeah, that's one of the words. I put them in my piece.
They've talked to a lot of people, a lot of very sensible people. People like Marcus Weldon, who used to be chief technology officer at Nokia, who said,
back to your previous point about them having a bit of a brain drain.
That's an interesting one that he's going actually, because he's someone I don't think they really want to use. But
that's something our former colleague Ray's been all over. He's quite good on Nokia departures, isn't he?
He is very good on that. Yeah, but Marcus Weldon had warned. He basically said, look. And this is something I've written about as well, without speaking to Marcus Weldon, that I think you can't really mandate specific technologies. You can't. You just said this yourself, driving people towards a specific technology. It's not the only way to deal with interoperability, Open RAN, and it's not the only network technology there is. And I certainly think that suggestions that have come out of Germany recently, where Deutsche Telekom seems to have been urging its government to mandate Open RAN even in legislation in future, and sort of make companies have to sort of build networks using Open RAN specs, I think is a very weird way to go. And this report to me, raised my confidence a bit that maybe that won't happen in the UK. And they also, the funding side is interesting, but they did seem to note that the amount that the UK is putting towards 5G test beds and stuff is really negligible, to be honest with you, compared with what the big equipment vendors spend. They said this themselves. They said 250 million is, it stacks up alongside tens of billions of pounds.
Yeah,
the big
split that 4 ways.
Yeah, it's a waste of money, to be honest. They didn't say it's a waste of money because obviously they still think that this should be used. It's just about how it gets used. But I think it's a waste of money. I don't see really the point.
It's not big enough to be an incentive, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. To me, the way to incentivize businesses and to attract technology companies is not to do it with public funding. I think there's other ways to do it.
But that's all they know.
It's negative.
That's the real problem. That's what I get from reading these things. This is the world these people live in. They don't really understand anything other than the standard state. Tax something you don't like and subsidize something you do like model. Yeah. And they just seem to be trapped in that way of thinking.
But where I was, the where I thought it failed, this report, and where I thought it was a bit depressing is that, even though they raised these concerns about Open RAN and sort of acknowledged there's a huge number of questions about it, and there's a huge number of funding issues, and there's all sorts of things that we need to, raise red flags about. They didn't really have any other suggestions. It wasn't like they said, well, hang on a minute. Okay, so if we're not going to do Open RAN, then why don't we think about doing this? Here's a great idea. They just sort of had this big gap where,
yes, I completely agree.
The consequence of that, what they ended up saying was, we think the government should investigate Open RAN and support it. So they raise this huge number of concerns, and then they sort of draw this conclusion that,
but we've got no better ideas.
But we've got no better ideas, so maybe you should do it.
Well, exactly. Let me read some more bits of it that I directly copied and pasted into my story. So there's one quote that said, the government, this is all from their conclusions and recommendations section, because it's a typically fucking long thing, like 60 pages or something. Says the government should support Open RAN and other efforts to drive the adoption of open standards and greater interoperability. While the success of Open RAN is not guaranteed, the government should encourage the deployment of Open RAN and ensure that the UK is not behind others in deploying technology. So that's quite a hedging position by itself.
That's basically saying, because they listed so many things that were wrong with Open RAN or that are a worry. You search on Open RAN, as I did. I went into it. I just did search on Open RAN to come up with all this stuff, and there's very little actually that's positive they say about Open RAN. That's the weird thing.
Yeah, but they said to give it a go anyway.
Let's give it a go anyway.
Yeah, well, there's
another section actually, Scott. You're looking at the report, but there's another bit when they're quite critical, I think, of the government strategy. I wrote it down somewhere because I'm sort of writing something on this at the moment that I haven't published yet.
This quite often happens on our pods now, isn't it? We talk about something
it does, and then the pod's helpful because I
helps you
gives me other ideas.
Do you know, I've noticed a few times on Monday you've written about stuff. Yeah, I was thinking, no, we chatted about that.
Exactly, which is one of the reasons.
I'm so pleased to be of assistance.
But they sort of didn't have any. They kind of criticised the government for this is the wording actually that I was looking for, pointing out the gaps in the government strategy. Here's one of the quotes: "There appear to be good opportunities for the government to support new market entry at the same time as driving deployment of 5G in the UK, but the diversification strategy fails to set out measures to achieve it." Well, they do as well. They basically said the government doesn't really have any ideas apart from Open RAN, it seems. But there's not, but they don't come up with anything themselves. It's not like they've done this long investigation and thought to themselves, oh, hang on a minute, here's where the UK can succeed and here's how we diversify. There's no suggestion. And my other criticism of it would be, this is supposed to be a 5G diversification strategy, right? I think that's the title of the paper. It's not a RAN diversification strategy. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
There's no mention, there's not one single mention of fiber, backhaul, core. Core comes up, I think, once in a quote by Samsung or someone. There's no mention of backhaul at all. There's no, the 5G network is so much more than just radio access. Radio access is 1/5 of spending on wireless. Yeah. All those cells that are being deployed, all those sites need connecting with fiber networks. Who are the vendors that provide those fiber networks? I'll tell you who they are in the UK at the moment. They're Nokia and Huawei. There's a bit of Adtran there, but that's a very, very consolidated market with not a lot of options as well. And yet there's no attention paid to that at all. And there's nothing about what are the opportunities for UK companies in these areas. If you look at UK strengths and some of the small vendors we do have, people like Filtronic, which is a tiny company up in North Yorkshire that I spoke with recently. They do things that are nothing to do with the radio access network, but there's a load of expertise in the UK that could be harnessed there to actually make it a bigger deal potentially.
Yeah.
So they just seem to have ignored all this.
Yes. So when they're putting out the feelers for a report like this, you do get the impression that, they'll get some people mucking in, but you don't get the impression, we can talk to specific evidence of this, that they're going much further than maybe, to pick a random example, reading an article in Light Reading. For their information. So just remind our audience what I'm alluding to.
There is a reference to a couple of light reading articles in it, where they've I think we wrote something about there's no guarantee that Open RAN won't just end up being dominated by Ericsson and Nokia. Yeah, I mean they're both making moves in that direction, and the government, this parliamentary report notes that and footnotes.
Right. And they specifically referred to that story. But I mean, so taking a piss out of you aside, if they're just relying on even you, exemplary telecoms journalists though you are, as opposed to actually going and chatting to these startups and these companies and really embedding themselves in the broader ecosystem, then they're only getting one part of the picture, aren't they?
Well, I think they did. I not sat in, but I observed a lot of the parliamentary briefing sessions that led up to this report last year and also at the start of this year. And they did get people in. They had Scott Petty from Vodafone on quite a lot. They had Andrea Donner on, who's also at Vodafone. They had Howard Watson from BT. They talked to the vendors. They had sessions with Mavenir, which is one of the Open RAN players. They had Samsung on. They had Huawei on back in the before they actually took the decision to ban it entirely. So they did go out and talk to the industry. It's not like they've just gone and written it without speaking to the industry. But it's all quite narrow as a 5G diversification strategy, which is what it's presented as.
Yeah.
They really looked at the RAN. They've decided that the radio access network is everything, and that's the only thing we should ever worry about. And completely missed the sort of bigger telecom network picture, as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing I would say, while I'm being critical about it, is Open RAN, to be honest, has arrived too late for 5G. I hate to say it, but anybody who thinks that Open RAN is going to have a massive impact on 5G is kidding themselves. You talk to Orange or the other operators, and they all say this technology is not going to be up to the same standard as traditional equipment until the mid 2020s. 2 or 3 years after that, we're going to start seeing 6G deployments. Late 2020s, that technology will be around. If they really wanted to position the UK for a role in future technology and do it in a sensible kind of long-term way, then they'd be talking about 6G. They wouldn't be talking about 5G, actually. They'd be talking about maybe how the UK can, have a big role in that market. How many mentions are there of 6G in this report? One, in a Samsung quote.
I see. Yeah. Well, that's the other problem. These things are often political. Well, obviously by definition political, and so you got the impression that they want the report to look like they're just giving it some thought. I mean, my concluding paragraph said it's hard to see this report as much more than a list of strategic nice-to-haves, coupled with a statement of regret that we don't already have them. Perhaps the current state of lockdown has served to reinforce the delusion that the state can succeed where markets have failed. But as ever, if it really wants to help, maybe just get out of the way more, which is a reference to sort of regulation and all that sort of thing.
But you mentioned this. I mean, this isn't just a UK thing. I feel this sort of, you mentioned this Telecom Italia arriving at the Open RAN Random of Understanding party a bit late and putting its name down.
The Euro begging bowl.
The begging bowl. It's very worrying, I think, that big operators, that those huge groups, which are very profitable, let's be honest, and paying dividends to their shareholders, are going to the European Union and saying, and not just the European Union, just governments in the region saying, "Oi, can you stick money into Open RAN?" Because they don't want to take the risk themselves, it seems. They're not prepared. They've all got venture capital arms. They've all got the ability to invest in these companies. Rakuten did it in Japan, for Christ's sake. They went and bought a US vendor called Altiostar that's developing Open RAN software. If they really care that much about it, why don't they throw their muscle behind it themselves instead of expecting European taxpayers to stump up the money when retail outlets are going out of business and airlines are going out of business? I think it's a disgrace.
Yeah. Well, and you can't. I mean, I do agree it's a disgrace, but you also can't blame them when you get reports like this one that we're just talking about, saying how the government needs to chuck more money at the sector.
Well, I mean, they'd be delighted, wouldn't they? Yeah. I mean, I you're right. You can't blame them if they think there's a willing government that's going to put some money towards it and they have to, then great. But I mean, look, it's got to be a pretty big commitment. This is the thing. It's got to be more than 250 million. Even they recognise that in this report, that it's nothing next to the tens of billions of pounds. So this is the problem, that you're going to get someone, and apparently there are reports from Germany, from Handelsblatt, which is a big German newspaper. Yeah, so it's believable that the German
hasn't done its reputation much good talking about vaccines recently, though.
No, probably not. But they're saying the German government's about to commit $2 billion to Open RAN as a public funding commitment, which is a lot of money to put into it, and maybe could make some kind of difference. But is it appropriate? And is it is it even going to move the needle when you've got the likes of Huawei and Ericsson and Nokia spending God knows what? Is it? Each, I mean, I don't know. Exactly. It's up to about 20 billion, I think, or something.
So I think that sums up. I think we don't want to be too down on the report, because at least they're thinking about it. But it was a bit of a fudge, and it's basically saying, yeah, we need to get involved and promote the things we want. But what it didn't say is that if we're going to basically bribe private companies into going in a strategic direction that we think as a government they should be, then we've got to chuck a lot more money at them, or find ways find ways of incentivizing them that are far better than we've got now. And I
Yeah.
think what will end up happening is typical British fudge, where they'll chuck a bit of money at them, they'll go, thank you very much, and then they'll do what they want.
Yeah.
So talking about British operator strategy, how about that for a segue?
Neat segue.
Yeah.
Love
we
it.
had Vodafone's Quarterlys, which, like I said, I don't cover because I don't like writing words like EBITDA, and nothing ever happens. They just make about the same amount of money as they did last year, especially when you strip out sort of exceptional items and M&A and all that sort of thing. But you're not as lazy as I am, and you had a little look at it, and you've also have you been chatting to them about their sort of broader strategy? Anyway, whatever it is, tell us what you know about Vodafone at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I always I agree with you. They are boring, the operator earnings updates, quite often, and they tend to feature Morgan Stanley analysts who just want to fill in little boxes on their spreadsheets about how much roaming, increase they can expect this year or decrease as it might be. But every now and again, you get some interesting comments about expectations of EU regulation in the sector, merger and acquisition activity or strategic moves. And we got wind of some changes that were happening at Vodafone leading up to the earnings announcement anyway, where they've basically decided to sort of do a restructuring of the technology department. The guy who's head of Vodafone UK technology at the moment, Scott Petty, is going to move into this group role where he basically takes charge of digital and IT services. And then networks would then be looked after by someone called Alberto Ripepi, who's deputy CTO at the moment. And both these men report directly to Johan Weiberg, who's the CTO. And it's a much bigger. I mean, it's not just a case of moving a few jobs around. It's a much bigger transformation than that. It's kind of a major overhaul of the technology and IT estate. Really, they're kind of looking to, replace. They're kind of looking to globalize things in a way and do things more on a kind of regional basis rather than rolling things out on a per country basis. So the idea is,
how many countries does Vodafone in Europe? Do you know off the top of your head?
So Europe, it's the UK, Spain, Germany, Italy.
So most of the biggies, except for France.
Well, it's big. There's a lot of there's other ones there that I've missed, but they've got a big European presence. And the idea is that Nick Reed got asked about this, I think, because, not trying to sort of shout out like reading, but I think we wrote the story and it was read and picked up by a few people. And then one of the analysts asked Nick Reed, what's this all about? And he basically...
You're just so up yourself, aren't you? You think you're the best journalist
I'm really up myself,
ever.
Yeah. But he basically said, these are really big changes we're doing on the operating model. What we're trying to do is drive greater standardization across networks and across IT and digital. So, I mean, the way I interpret it is it's almost making them look a bit more like an Amazon or a Google, I guess, you get their employees and their customers, they can sort of access the same technologies regardless of physical location. And Vodafone will be able to sort of roll out standardized platforms in a similar kind of way and have one product. So you might have a center of excellence for IoT that's located in a particular part of Europe, but it develops products for the whole region. It's not like you've got one team doing it for the UK and one team doing it for Italy and so on.
Yes. So a lot of it is, I suppose, efficiency.
It's efficiency, and they're expecting a profit and a profit increase from it and a return on capital increase. So it's partly efficiency, but it's also designed like it would make it easier to do things like, this was called out in the earnings report that they could have, by having these standardized platforms in a kind of more integrated technology organization, it'd be easier for some of these third parties they're doing deals with, like Microsoft and Amazon, to connect with them and then go global rather than just having a deal in one particular country. So they've got this deal at the moment that's coming out that was announced to the press last year with AWS to do an edge computing service based on 5G. And that's going to be rolled out in the UK, I think, in the spring, and then Germany maybe later in the year. If they change things this way, the idea is they could sort of go European with this at the same time, because you're basing it on the same IT tools and, you've got one.
Yeah, so we get a lot of that sort of public cloud rationale, don't we?
Exactly.
Of agility and scale and all that.
Yeah. Now, my concerns about, I think it sounds like a good idea in a lot of ways. You can see, you can see it obviously making them more attractive to those sorts of companies they've mentioned. You can see it aiding efficiency and bringing savings and all that sort of thing. My concern would be that they're not the first operator to have talked about this kind of approach. So one prominent example is Deutsche Telekom in Germany, which a few years ago was talking about what it called the PAN net, this sort of pan-European network strategy. And its goal, it was a similar sort of thing, a similar sounding thing anyway. And we don't know the full details of Vodafone's plan at the moment. But what Deutsche Telekom was trying to do was basically collapse a lot of service platforms that it had for individual countries into a much smaller number of like regional, cloud-based technologies, and realize efficiencies, make it easier to spin up services and launch them quickly and do all these sorts of things. They're very similar sounding kind of objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all turned out to be a lot harder than they imagined. I mean, I used to write about this a lot, actually, at Light Reading. 2017 and 2018 probably spent half my job just writing about the PAN net and what was happening. And they just found it a much bigger challenge to do what they're doing, to get rid of legacy stuff, to move things onto the same platform, to get vendor buy-in. And it's a much lower key thing at Deutsche Telekom nowadays. Now, I did look, after listening to the Vodafone report, I did look in Deutsche Telekom's last annual report to see if there's any mention of the PAN net, and it's mentioned, so it sounds like it's still alive, but there was not a lot of focus on it, and it's not really had a noticeable impact on Deutsche Telekom's either. That's the thing.
Well, those grandiose IT projects, I mean, you can only imagine how difficult they are to pull off when you're dealing with legacy stuff, when you're having to avoid downtime, when you're having to get thousands of people across different countries and different languages to all point in the same direction. We see it. I'm not going to give away any trade secrets, but we see it occasionally within Informa. There'll be some new bright idea, but it's all. It's one thing Stephen Carter announcing it, but it's another thing getting thousands of people all over the world to implement it in their daily routine.
Exactly.
So God knows how you even go about it.
And it's clearly not for everybody. So the other interesting thing is some operators have gone in the opposite direction. So there's a company called Vion, which is less well known than Vodafone, but is a big deal. It's mainly Russian, but has like operations in various emerging markets. I think if you look at it in terms of subscribers, it's like the 9th biggest operator in the world or something.
Right,
so
group.
They're in the top. And they had this plan again. They had this sort of attempt years ago to create this single, like, app-based digital platform for the whole group, that you'd roll out to customers everywhere. And it all went horribly wrong. I mean, it ended up with the CEO then, Jean-Yves Charlier, he was called, leaving in 2018. And then even more recently, they seem to have done the total opposite to Vodafone and got rid of a group technology strategy altogether. So they used to have a guy called Yogesh Malik, who was group CTO. He's gone now. He's now at Tele2. And all the decisions about new digital and technology initiatives have been delegated to the individual operating companies, each of which has its own chief technology officer. So they've kind of gone in the total opposite direction. So you can't say that what Vodafone's doing is necessarily the most sensible way to do things. It might turn out to be a lot harder if it goes wrong, and it might not deliver on the kind of promises they've made. But it's interesting. It's a big plan, and it's interesting to hear it talked up by the CEO and the CFO in the way it was on an earnings call.
I just quickly saw an email came up, and it's sort of slightly relevant to the Open RAN stuff we talk about. It's a weird time to send this press release. So Deloro, who we and Ericsson rate highly as a sort of market sizer and forecaster for telecoms, has just sent an email saying an Open RAN market expected to approach $10 billion and to account for more than 10% of the RAN market. I can't see. That's between 20 and 25. Anyway, it's just interesting that Deloro is sending out specific Open RAN.
Well, they have done that before. I mean, I don't know if I haven't seen that email yet.
So it's literally just come through in the last 5 minutes.
It sounds like they might have adjusted their forecast, but I know what they were previously expecting until late last year was that Open RAN would have about 10% of the market by the mid-2020s.
Oh, so nothing's changed then. That's what this is saying. Okay.
Right.
I'll just mention it because
which is less than 10 billion though, if they're saying. I mean,
okay. So either either they've tweaked their numbers or they've increased the size of their overall market.
I mean, 10 billion's not 10% of the RAM market. That's about a third of the RAM market. So
right. Okay. Well, I won't go into it anymore because I've only just briefly glimpsed at it. But it might be interesting.
The overall RAM spending's somewhere between 30 and 35 billion a year.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm gonna put it in my little calendar for Monday morning in case fuck all has happened over the weekend. It's always nice to have a little Monday morning one in reserve, isn't it?
It is.
So I think we've been about an hour, but we typically go about an hour and 15 these days. Let me just spend 5 minutes on my little bugbear, which is an interesting bit of news that Jeff Bezos is stepping down from CEO of Amazon. He's obviously one of the most recognizable, most successful CEOs in the world, having started up, he's the classic Silicon Valley, started out from his garage type of thing, and is now the richest person in the world by virtue of his Amazon shares. He occasionally swaps places with Elon Musk, and Bill Gates is right up there. In fact, Bill Gates is relevant because my headline, I basically said that Jeff Bezos does a Bill Gates, because what he's doing is he's stepping back from being CEO and is going to be executive chairman. And then the lad he's got in as CEO is the AWS person.
So that's Andy Jassy, is that?
Andy Jassy, that's it. So there's two interesting things about that. Firstly, I think he did the right move bringing an AWS person as opposed to whoever heads up the e-commerce part, because all the growth and profit and general corporate goodness these days is coming from AWS rather than the e-commerce part, even though in terms of revenue, e-commerce is much higher, but it's obviously much lower margin. So I think that's a good idea. And I also think fair enough for Bezos to, after 20 plus years, just go, all right, I think I'm going to give myself a little bit of a breather. But of course he's not, because he's a complete workaholic and completely manic. And he's got all these other projects. He's got this space project. And the other thing that's interesting about the move is he's a lot of the stuff he's moving into philanthropy, which is where I make the comparison with Bill Gates. And again, on one level, you sort of think, fair enough. Like, a lot of people have a pop at Bill Gates, but he seems to have done a hell of a lot to try and tackle malaria in Africa, for example. And he's got this foundation that Warren Buffett chucks a few bill in every now and then that goes to good causes. I think people get upset at the thought of philanthropy being managed by private interests rather than public interests. But ultimately, if worse off people benefit from it, who cares what the mechanism is? So that I'm all good with. And it looks like Bezos can do that. He's already got a couple of foundations up. One is like helping impoverished families in the States. Another one is to do with eco stuff. And it's the eco stuff that rang alarm bells with me, not because of my sort of cynicism about the motives of some people who bang on about eco stuff. It's where it coincides with the World Economic Forum, the Davos people, which is why I spoke of a great reset in my headline, because they seem to be using eco stuff as their pretext for just sort of grabbing control of global agendas. And you can see why they would, because, of course, ecology is a global issue by definition and one that needs global solutions. But I just, it could be a bit tinfoil hatty of me. It could be a bit paranoid of me, but they start saying how we've got to have a great reset. We've got to remake everything. We've got to build back better after the coronavirus. And I just thought it seems like a bit of a coincidence that Jeff Bezos has picked this particular era to step back and get more involved in this sort of globalization, Davos, WEF type of stuff. At the same time as Bill Gates does it, Warren Buffett does it. And yeah, that was just my point.
It's sinister almost, really.
Well, what you've got is this apparent collaboration between big government and big business. And that big business is increasingly big tech. Because, of course, as we've chatted about before, big tech has enormous power. Yeah. On the social media side, they've got the power to cut off the US president from being able to speak to his own electorate through his main means. And then obviously AWS has shown how much power it has by being able to cut off Parler. I noticed Pierre sharing the thing earlier about the
Yeah.
Parler CEO's been booted out by his board now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're just getting this concentration of power. And when someone like Jeff Bezos, the richest person in the world, decides to take a step back in order to focus more on this supposedly philanthropic stuff, it does give me the creeps a little bit. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent to your point, but it's telecom relevant, and we always talk about the cloud providers. There was another deal actually this week that in one of my stories I wrote about with Singtel, I think, doing a tie up with, I think it was it AWS or was it Azure? I think it was Azure actually in this case, but it's another one of these edge cloud deals where the operators are essentially saying, look, it almost sounds like they're doing connectivity and a few other things, and the cloud providers come along and do all the exciting whizzy stuff and supply the platforms and the ecosystems for app developers. And hey presto, you've got your sort of your edge-based 5G cloud service on top of your normal cloud services. And there's another opportunity that the telcos years ago were hoping to play a much bigger part in, that all of a sudden looks like it's going to be dominated by the internet firms. So the advance just goes on, I think. And I find it really scary at the moment in a way I didn't a year ago, actually. Especially in the pandemic, what's happened is
the increased power.
The share prices. I mean, I'd be interesting someone to just put together a little sort of pie chart, I guess, of overall market capitalization in the among the top companies, and see how much it's skewed more in the last year towards the the Facebooks and the Amazons and the Microsoft.
Yeah, well, everyone knows that there's been a transfer of wealth from, especially in business, from smaller businesses to massive companies.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily sinister in so much as it's inevitable if you shut down regular business, then the best resourced, the ones with the most economies of scale and that sort of thing, are going to do well. And obviously e-commerce is going to do well. Our house is basically a jungle of Amazon boxes.
Yeah. The other thing is the prospect of sort of nasty bosses, yeah? Because I think the web companies and the internet companies have done a reasonably good sort of job of projecting over the last few years. They've sort of projected themselves as, I mean, Google even had as its motto, didn't it, at one time, don't be evil. We're kind of nice guys who came to America years ago from Russia and, did well at university, and we believe in the right things. And they've all had, to a certain extent, haven't they? T-shirt wearing, slick, smart, but not particularly sinister kind of bosses. And is that changing a bit now? With some of these moves that that you see Bezos and Gates making. Not to mention the spats that are happening all of a sudden. I mean, there's been a bit of a bust up between Tim Cook, hasn't there, and
Zuckerberg,
which I find really interesting. The current geopolitics and the current situation.
I kind of want to see them scrapping.
The only hope is that
these oligarchs aren't. What you don't want is the oligarchs all agreeing with each other. Jesus
no,
Christ.
You don't. So maybe them falling out is good, but at the same time, there's a risk, I think, that they come across as perhaps not the sort of nice guys that they want to make themselves out to be.
Yeah, and I wrote a piece,
because we don't have a Donald Trump in charge of one of these companies, do we? Who everybody,
an obnoxious prick.
Exactly. And
I think the closest is Elon Musk. He seems a bit outside.
He's the closest.
That world.
Yeah. The other one I would say is the closest, although I'm not sure I'd put them up there as a sort of tech giant. But Uber had a boss. He was the previous boss of Uber.
Yeah, Travis Kalanick or whatever.
I mean, he came.
But then he got kicked out for being too.
He got
Trump-esque.
kicked out. He did. You're right. But he was. Yes, he did. But I mean,
I think he was chatting up the staff or something. No, I don't know that. Lawyers.
Yeah, something
me making a joke. Yeah. Yes. And I wrote a piece actually. The headline was something along the lines of maybe unions will succeed where regulators have failed with big tech, because Google and Amazon are both having union trouble. Google's got this big aggro where they kicked out a woman who was on their AI ethics stuff because she flagged up, I think, some stuff to do with race and AI ethics, facial recognition, that sort of thing. And you can imagine how fucking sensitive all that is. If facial recognition is shown to have some kind of racial bias, that's complete dynamite. And I think she maybe was flagging up some stuff like that, and they turfed her out, and that's led to a sort of a bit of a rebellion in Google, where they seem to have more than their fair share of activists. But then at Amazon, they've got some union in Alabama complaining about like warehouse conditions and normal your normal union stuff. And of course, it was some activists within Amazon that prompted AWS to turf out Parler, some appropriate enough eco group within Amazon. And then on top of that, Andy Jassy, I embedded a bunch of tweets from him. He's only tweeted about 300 times, and sort of 5 or 10 of them are all quite socio-political things, going sort of rah-rah about this, that, and the other. And he's now in charge of all of Amazon. I don't like that.
Yeah. Not sure that.
By all means, have a political conscience. And my point is never to have a pop at any of the particular causes they espouse. It's just that separation of church and state. Are you there to provide me with a web platform, or are you there to lecture me on morality?
Yeah.
And I just worry when those two things start to overlap. That's all.
Definitely.
All right, man. You seem to be getting distracted, and we've done well over an hour.
Getting distracted by my bladder.
Getting by your bladder. Yeah, my son seems to have started playing the PlayStation because I can hear him shouting in outrage and dismay.
Yeah, I get that as well going on in the background sometimes.
So
no, it hasn't.
So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. So thanks, mate, and thanks to the audience for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.